It was a normal afternoon at the neighborhood grocery store, the kind of day that felt ordinary in every way. The automatic doors kept sliding open and shut as people walked in and out with carts full of food. The air carried a mix of fresh bread, cleaning products, and the faint sweetness from the fruit section. The store wasn't fancy, but it was clean, organized, and familiar to everyone who lived nearby. At Register 3 stood a cashier who had been working there for almost 4 years. She knew most of the regular customers by face, some by name. She had a calm way about her. Even when the line grew long or customers became impatient, she stayed steady. She believed that small kindnesses mattered, especially in places where people were often stressed about money, time, or both. That afternoon, her shift had been smooth so far. A mother with 2 children had just left her line, thanking her for helping pack the bags carefully. An elderly man had joked about how prices used to be half of what they were now. The rhythm of scanning items and hearing the soft beep had become almost comforting. Then the store doors opened again, and someone walked in who immediately caught attention without trying to. He was dressed sharply. His suit looked tailored, not off the rack. His shoes were polished. A watch on his wrist reflected the bright store lights. He didn't rush like most people. He moved calmly, almost like he had nowhere else to be. A few heads turned. Not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't seem like the usual customer. Most people who came to that store wore casual clothes after work or simple outfits for errands. This man looked like he had just stepped out of an important meeting. He grabbed a cart and began walking through the aisles. He didn't look at prices. That was the first thing some customers noticed. He picked up imported coffee without checking the tag. Premium chocolate, high-end olive oil, fresh seafood from the chilled section, organic fruits arranged carefully in clear containers. His cart filled quickly, and not with basic items. The cashier noticed him too, but she didn't think much of it. People from different backgrounds came in sometimes. The neighborhood had changed over the years. New apartments had been built nearby. Maybe he had just moved in. When he finally joined her line, there were 3 people ahead of him. He stood quietly, scrolling through his phone. He didn't seem impatient. If anything, he looked relaxed. The woman at the register continued her routine. Greet, scan, bag, smile, repeat. Soon it was his turn. "Good afternoon," she said politely. He nodded with a small smile. "Good afternoon." She began scanning his items one by one. The total climbed higher and higher on the screen. A few people behind him glanced at it. The number wasn't small. It wasn't the kind of grocery bill people in that store usually had. She kept her expression neutral. It wasn't her job to judge anyone's cart. As she scanned the final item, she told him the total. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, then paused. He checked again, then his other pocket. His calm expression shifted slightly. Not panic. Not yet. Just confusion. He set his phone down on the counter and reached into his back pocket. Nothing. The people behind him waited. One person shifted their weight. Another looked at their watch. He checked his other jacket pocket more carefully this time, patting around as if hoping something might magically appear. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. The cashier stopped moving and looked at him. "Is everything okay?" He gave a short, awkward smile. "It seems I left my wallet." The words hung in the air. Left my wallet. It sounded simple, but the total on the screen made it complicated. The person directly behind him sighed softly. Not loud enough to be rude, but loud enough to be heard. He pulled out his phone quickly. "I might have a digital card," he said, tapping the screen. He tried once, then again. The machine beeped in rejection. He frowned slightly. "It's not connecting." The line behind him grew longer. A few whispers started. "Of course," someone muttered under their breath. "He doesn't look like he can't afford it," another voice said quietly. The cashier felt the tension rising. She had seen situations like this before, but usually with small totals. A forgotten wallet wasn't rare. But this was different. The amount was high enough to make anyone nervous. "I can put the items aside for you," she offered gently. You can come back once you have your wallet. He looked embarrassed now. Truly embarrassed. His posture changed. His shoulders dropped slightly. I live about 15 minutes away, he explained. I must have left it on my desk. The store manager, who had been observing from a distance, slowly walked closer. Not aggressively, just carefully. Is there a problem? The manager asked. The man turned to him. I left my wallet at home. I can go get it and return immediately. The manager glanced at the screen. The total was still glowing brightly. We can hold the cart for an hour, the manager said carefully. After that, we'll have to restock. The line behind grew restless. A mother with a tired expression adjusted her child on her hip. A young man crossed his arms impatiently. The cashier could feel the shift in the room. It wasn't loud, but it was heavy. The man nodded slowly. I understand. For a brief second, something unspoken passed across his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride exactly. It was discomfort. The kind that comes from standing in front of strangers while your mistake becomes public. He started gathering his phone, preparing to step aside. And that's when she noticed it clearly. He wasn't pretending. There was no arrogance in him. No argument. No demand for special treatment. Just quiet embarrassment. She thought about how many times she had seen people treated differently based on how they looked. Sometimes unfairly judged. Sometimes quickly dismissed. She also thought about the long line behind him and how everyone was watching. Before she could overthink it, she heard her own voice speak. If you don't mind, she said calmly, I can cover it for now. The store seemed to freeze. The manager blinked. Are you sure? The customers behind him went silent. The man looked at her, surprised. That's not necessary. It's okay, she said simply. You can return it tomorrow. Her heart was beating faster now, but her voice stayed steady. She knew the total. She knew what it meant. It wasn't a small amount. It would take a noticeable part of her savings. But she also knew something else. Sometimes dignity costs less than regret. The silence in the store grew thicker. The manager hesitated, unsure if this crossed any policy. But it was her card. Her choice. The man stared at her for a moment, almost studying her face to see if she was serious. I would never forget something like this intentionally, he said quietly. I believe you, she replied. And in that moment, the entire store felt like it was holding its breath. For a few seconds after she said, I believe you, no one moved. The man stood still, his hand resting lightly on the counter. The manager looked from her to him and back again, unsure whether to step in or stay quiet. The people in line had stopped whispering. Even the beeping sounds from the other registers felt distant. The cashier reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out her own wallet. It was not thick. It was worn at the edges from years of use. She opened it carefully, aware that everyone's eyes were on her. Inside were a few folded bills, her ID, and her debit card. That card held her savings, small but hard-earned. You don't have to do this, the man said again, his voice lower now, almost protective. I know, she answered, but I want to. There was no anger in her voice, no drama, just calm certainty. The manager leaned in slightly. Are you sure you're comfortable with this? He asked quietly. She nodded. Yes. The total still glowed on the screen. She could see it clearly. It was more than what she usually spent on groceries for herself in 2 weeks. It was more than what she planned to send to her mother that month to help with bills. It was more than she expected to risk on a stranger. But she also remembered something her grandmother used to say, you never lose by doing right. You only lose by staying silent when you shouldn't. She slid her card into the machine. For a second, nothing happened. The machine processed. A soft spinning symbol appeared. The entire store seemed to watch the small screen. Approved. The receipt printed out slowly, the paper making that familiar dry scratching sound as it came out of the machine. Felt louder than usual. The cashier tore the receipt and handed one copy to the man. She kept the other for herself. Her hands were steady, though inside she felt the weight of what she had just done. There you go, she said gently. The man looked at the receipt, then at her. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't make a joke to ease the tension. Instead, his face showed something deeper. Respect. "I will be here tomorrow morning," he said clearly. "Before noon." She nodded. "That's fine." He reached for his grocery bags, but then paused again. "May I at least carry these out for you?" he asked. She shook her head softly. "It's okay. That's not necessary." The manager cleared his throat, signaling for the line to move. "All right, next customer please." The spell broke. The woman behind him stepped forward, still staring in disbelief. A few customers exchanged looks. Some seemed impressed. Others looked skeptical. As the man walked toward the exit with his groceries, he didn't rush. He walked slowly, almost thoughtfully. The automatic doors opened for him, and just like that, he was gone. The store noise returned. The beeping started again. Bags rustled. Conversations resumed. But something had changed. The next customer leaned forward slightly. "You don't even know him," she whispered. Not unkindly, just curious. The cashier gave a small shrug. "Sometimes you don't need to." The woman shook her head in surprise but didn't argue. The rest of the shift passed, but not in the usual way. Word spread quickly through the store. One employee from the bakery section came by pretending to adjust a display just to get a closer look at her. Another cashier leaned over during a slow moment. "You really paid that whole thing?" her coworker asked quietly. "Yes. What if he doesn't come back?" She paused for a second before answering. "Then I'll know I tried." That answer stayed with her for the rest of the afternoon. When her break time came, she sat alone in the small employee room. She pulled out her phone and checked her bank balance. The number was lower now, noticeably lower. A small wave of doubt tried to creep in. What if he doesn't return? What if this was a mistake? She pushed the thought away. She hadn't done it for a reward. She hadn't done it because he looked wealthy. She had done it because of the look on his face in that moment. The look of someone who wasn't used to asking for help. She knew that look. She had worn it before. There had been a time in her life when she stood at a counter with barely enough money to cover what she needed. She remembered the heat rising in her cheeks, the feeling of everyone watching, the silent judgment that sometimes came without words. Someone once gave her grace in a small way, not by paying her bill, but by speaking kindly instead of sharply. It mattered more than they probably realized. Now, sitting in the break room, she wondered if she had just passed that same grace forward. When her shift finally ended, she clocked out and walked to the bus stop as usual. The sky was turning orange as the sun lowered. She felt tired, but not from the work. From the weight of the decision. At home, her apartment was quiet. She placed her bag on the small kitchen table and sat down. For a moment, she stared at the wall, replaying the scene in her mind. The silence in the store, the card machine processing, the receipt printing. She thought about telling someone, maybe a friend, maybe her neighbor, but she decided not to. It didn't feel like something to announce. She made herself a simple dinner and tried to relax. But every time her phone buzzed with a notification, her heart jumped slightly. She half expected a message from an unknown number saying thank you or confirming his return. Nothing came. Meanwhile, across town, the man placed his grocery bags carefully on his kitchen counter. His home was large, modern, and quiet. The kind of place that didn't echo with laughter or noise, but with stillness. He unpacked slowly. He didn't turn on the television. He didn't make any calls. Instead, he leaned against the counter and thought about what had happened. He had forgotten his wallet before. It wasn't impossible. He was human. But no one had ever responded the way she did. Most people in his world responded to power, to status, to money. Doors opened because of who he was. Smiles appeared because of what he owned. But today she hadn't known any of that. She had only seen a man in an uncomfortable situation. And she chose kindness. He picked up the receipt she had handed him and looked at it again. The amount was printed clearly. He knew it wasn't small for someone working behind a register. He felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt. Not obligation. Something closer to responsibility. Back in her apartment, she finally lay down to sleep. The room was dark, except for the faint streetlight coming through the curtains. She stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would reveal everything. Either he would return, and this would become a simple story of trust. Or he wouldn't, and this would become a lesson she would carry quietly. But as she closed her eyes, one thought brought her peace. She had acted in alignment with who she was. Not with fear, not with suspicion, but with courage. And sometimes that was enough to sleep well. Morning would come soon, and with it, the answer everyone in that store was silently waiting for. Morning arrived quietly, but for her it didn't feel ordinary. She woke up earlier than usual. Not because of an alarm, but because her mind had already started running. For a few seconds, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember why she felt this tightness in her chest. Then it came back to her. Today was the day. She got ready for work like she always did. Simple clothes, hair tied back neatly, comfortable shoes. She moved through her small apartment in silence, making a quick cup of tea before leaving. She checked her phone once more before stepping out the door. No messages. The bus ride felt longer than usual. Every stop seemed slower. Every red light stretched out. She kept replaying yesterday's moment in her head. The way the store went silent. The way he looked at her when she said she believed him. Part of her felt calm. The other part felt uncertain. When she arrived at the store, the morning shift was already busy. Deliveries were being unloaded. Shelves were being restocked. The smell of fresh bread drifted in from the bakery section. As soon as she walked in through the employee entrance, one of her coworkers looked up. "Well?" the coworker asked immediately. She blinked. "Well, what? Has he called?" She shook her head. "No." The coworker gave her a look that wasn't unkind, just curious. "You really think he's coming back?" She paused before answering. "Yes." It wasn't loud confidence. It was quiet belief. She clocked in and took her place at register 3 again. The same counter, the same scanner, the same routine. But today, everything felt different. Every time the automatic doors slid open, her eyes lifted. Every time a man in a suit walked in, her heart skipped for half a second. The morning customers didn't know the story yet. They simply came in for milk, bread, and vegetables. She greeted each one the same way she always did. Calm, polite, steady. But inside, she was waiting. Across town, the man was already awake too. He had slept less than usual. Not because he was worried about the money, but because he kept thinking about the look in her eyes. There had been no hesitation in it. No hidden motive. Just trust. He stood in his large kitchen, coffee untouched on the counter, staring at the same receipt he had looked at the night before. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of help. His life had been built on being the one who solved problems, the one who signed checks, the one who made decisions. People depended on him. Yesterday, for a brief moment, he had been the one depending on someone else. And she hadn't made him feel small. That mattered more than the amount printed on that receipt. He picked up his wallet from the desk where it had been left. He opened it, checking that everything was inside. Cards, cash, identification. Then he added something extra. He paused, thinking carefully, before placing a folded envelope into his jacket pocket. Back at the store, it was almost noon. She had started to relax slightly. Maybe he would come later. Maybe traffic had delayed him. Maybe the doors opened again. This time, she didn't notice right away because she was scanning a customer's groceries. But a shift in the room caught her attention. The customer in front of her glanced over her shoulder and went quiet. She looked up. He was standing just inside the entrance. Dressed differently today. Still neat but not in a full suit. A simple button-down shirt, dark pants. Less formal. More human. Their eyes met from across the store. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he began walking toward her register. Her heartbeat picked up, but her face remained calm. The customer she was serving finished paying and stepped aside, but not too far. A few others in line seemed to recognize him as well. Word had spread more than she realized. He stopped in front of her counter. I said I would return before noon, he said gently. She felt something inside her loosen, a quiet relief she hadn't allowed herself to fully expect. You did, she replied. He reached into his pocket and placed his wallet on the counter first, almost as a small joke to show he had it this time. Then he took out the envelope. I wanted to repay you properly, he said. She nodded. The amount is on the receipt. I know, he answered. He opened the envelope and counted the exact total in cash, placing it neatly on the counter between them. But the envelope wasn't empty. There's more in there, he said calmly. She looked at him, confused. Why? Because what you did wasn't just about money. The people nearby had gone quiet again. Not dramatically, just naturally drawn to the moment. She didn't touch the envelope yet. You don't owe me more, she said softly. He shook his head. I'm not paying you extra for groceries. I'm acknowledging what you did. She hesitated. Inside the envelope was more than the grocery total. Enough to cover what she paid and then some. Not an overwhelming amount, but significant for someone working hourly shifts. I can't accept that, she said honestly. You can, he replied. And I hope you will. There was no arrogance in his voice. No sense of superiority. Just sincerity. She thought carefully before answering. If you want to repay me, the total is enough. He studied her face again, as if trying to understand her better. May I ask you something? He said. She nodded. Why did you do it? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. She looked down briefly at the counter, then back at him. Because I didn't want you to feel embarrassed in front of everyone. He absorbed that quietly. I've felt that before, she continued. Not with that kind of total, but with not having enough. And people watching. He was silent for a moment. You didn't know who I was, he said. I didn't need to. That answer seemed to settle something in him. The manager, who had been observing from a distance again, stepped closer. Everything all right here? He asked. Yes, the man said calmly. More than all right. He turned back to her. Would you be willing to take a short break? She looked surprised. A break? I would like to speak with you and the manager for a few minutes, if that's possible. The manager looked uncertain but curious. We can step into the office, he suggested. She glanced at the growing line behind her. Her coworker quickly moved over to cover the register. Go, the coworker whispered. We've got this. She wiped her hands lightly on her apron and stepped away from the counter. Inside the small office, the space felt tighter than usual. 3 chairs, a desk, a computer humming quietly. The man didn't sit right away. I want to be transparent, he began. I'm not just a random shopper. She raised an eyebrow slightly. He continued, I own several businesses in this city. Retail, logistics, property. I visit different neighborhoods often. Not always announced. The manager straightened in his chair. I came into this store yesterday because I've been studying areas for potential investment, the man said. Growth, expansion, community environment. The words hung in the air. She listened carefully, unsure where this was going. I truly did forget my wallet, he added. That part was not planned. But what happened after, that was real. And it told me more about this place than any report could. The room was quiet. You saw someone in an uncomfortable situation and responded with dignity, he said, looking directly at her. That says something about this store. About the people who work here. The manager cleared his throat softly. What are you suggesting? The man finally sat down. I'm suggesting that I would like to invest in upgrading this location. Equipment, interior improvements, staff development. The manager blinked. She sat frozen, unsure if she was hearing correctly. And I would like to do it because of what happened yesterday, he finished. The air in the small office felt different now. Heavier, but in a hopeful way. She looked down at her hands, trying to process it all. A simple decision at a checkout counter. A single moment of kindness. And now this. Outside the office, the store carried on as usual. Customers shopped. Carts rolled. Receipts printed. But inside that small room, Something bigger than groceries was unfolding. The small office felt even smaller after he finished speaking. For a few seconds, no one said anything. The hum of the old computer in the corner sounded louder than usual. Outside the thin walls, the store continued as normal. Carts rolled. A child laughed. The scanner beeped again and again. Life was moving, unaware that something unexpected was unfolding in that cramped room. The manager leaned back slowly in his chair, studying the man in front of him. "You're serious?" he asked carefully. "Yes," the man replied without hesitation. "Very serious." She sat quietly, trying to take it all in. Just yesterday, she had been worrying about whether she would ever see that money again. Now she was sitting in a conversation about investment and upgrades. It didn't feel real. The manager folded his hands on the desk. "We've talked about renovations for years," he admitted. "But budgets have always been tight. Corporate hasn't approved anything major." The man nodded. "I understand how that works. That's why I don't want this to stay just talk." He reached into his jacket again and placed a business card on the desk. It was simple, clean, no flashy design, just a name, a company logo, and contact details. The manager picked it up and read it silently. His eyebrows lifted slightly. She couldn't see the card clearly from where she sat, but she could tell by the manager's reaction that this wasn't a small claim. "I'm prepared to begin discussions immediately," the man continued. "Not as charity, as partnership. This location has potential. And after what I witnessed yesterday, I believe it deserves more." She finally found her voice. "Because of me?" she asked quietly. "Because of what you showed," he corrected gently. That answer settled somewhere deep inside her. He wasn't praising her. He wasn't putting her on a stage. He was acknowledging something simple: character. The manager nodded slowly. "We'd need to talk with higher management, of course." "Of course," the man agreed. "I've done this before. I know the process." There was no rush in his tone. No pressure. Just calm confidence. She looked from one man to the other, still trying to understand how a moment at the register had led here. "I didn't do it for this," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "That's why it matters." Those words stayed in the room long after he said them. After another few minutes of discussion about meetings and paperwork, they all stood up. The conversation felt both serious and strangely personal at the same time. Before opening the office door, the man turned to her again. "There's one more thing," he said. She looked up. "If you ever have goals beyond this counter, I would be willing to support them." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Education, training, starting something of your own someday. I believe in investing where there is integrity." The offer wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was steady. Her first instinct was to refuse again. She didn't want to feel like she had done something expecting a reward. But she also knew that opportunities didn't always knock twice. "I'll think about it," she said honestly. "That's all I ask," he replied. When they stepped out of the office, several employees pretended not to stare. But everyone was curious. The story from yesterday had already traveled through the staff like quiet electricity. He walked toward the front of the store with them. Before leaving, he turned to her one last time at the register. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the groceries, for the respect." She nodded. "You're welcome." The automatic doors opened, and he stepped out into the daylight. This time, the silence in the store felt different. It wasn't tense. It wasn't doubtful. It felt proud. Her coworker rushed over as soon as the doors closed. "What just happened?" she whispered urgently. She let out a small breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I think something good." The manager called a quick meeting during the slower afternoon hour. All staff gathered near the front aisle. Some still held box cutters from stocking shelves. Others wiped their hands on aprons. He cleared his throat. "I want everyone to hear this directly," he began. "Yesterday, something happened at this store that showed real character. Because of that, we may be entering a new chapter." Murmurs spread softly through the group. He explained what he could without sharing private details. Investment discussions, possible renovations, equipment upgrades, staff bonuses if things moved forward. Faces lit up slowly. The bakery worker smiled widely. The stock clerk looked stunned. One of the younger cashiers actually clapped quietly before realizing no one else had. All eyes eventually turned to her. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It wasn't just me," she said quickly. "It's all of us. This store is like this because of everyone here." That was true. She meant it. But deep down, she knew that small choices create big waves. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Customers who had witnessed the moment the day before returned and asked questions. Some congratulated her. Some shook their heads in disbelief. "You're brave," one older customer told her gently. She didn't feel brave. She felt relieved. When she clocked out that evening, she noticed something new. The store looked the same. The lights were the same. The shelves hadn't changed yet. But the atmosphere felt lighter. As she walked to the bus stop, she thought about how close she had been to staying silent yesterday. How easy it would have been to simply let him leave and restock the cart. No one would have blamed her. No one would have expected more. But she would have remembered that moment. At home, she sat by the window, watching the street below. The envelope with the returned money rested on her table. She had accepted only the exact total. The extra cash remained untouched in the envelope, still folded. She hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the manager. "Meeting scheduled with corporate tomorrow. Looks promising." She smiled softly. Meanwhile, across town, the man sat in his study reviewing documents. But his thoughts drifted back to the store. In his world, decisions were often based on numbers. Profit margins, growth charts, market analysis. But yesterday, the most powerful indicator hadn't been on paper. It had been human. He knew something many people forgot. Businesses succeed not only because of location or strategy, but because of culture. Because of how people treat each other when no one is watching. And yesterday, everyone had been watching. Yet she acted the same way she likely would have if the store had been empty. That consistency mattered. Back in her apartment, she finally allowed herself to feel it fully. Pride. Not loud pride. Not the kind that demands attention. But the quiet kind that comes from knowing you stayed true to yourself. Tomorrow, meetings would happen. Papers would be signed or discussed. Plans would begin forming. But tonight, she rested in something simpler. She had chosen kindness without knowing the outcome. And somehow, that choice had echoed farther than she ever expected. The grocery store lights would turn on again in the morning. The scanner would beep. Customers would line up. But beneath the routine, something new was beginning to grow. Not just fresh paint or new equipment. Hope. And it all started with one decision at a checkout counter. The next few weeks moved faster than anyone expected. At first, nothing looked different from the outside. The same sign hung above the entrance. The same carts stood in neat rows. The same automatic doors opened and closed for customers coming in after work. But inside, conversations had changed. Meetings were happening behind the office door almost every other day. Representatives from higher management visited. People in business suits walked through the aisles with clipboards, measuring walls and checking equipment. The old refrigerators that hummed too loudly were inspected. The flickering light near the frozen section was finally noted for replacement. Employees whispered in excitement during their breaks. "Do you think they'll really renovate everything? I heard they might add self-checkout machines." Someone said bonuses are coming. She tried not to get caught up in rumors. She still showed up for her shifts the same way she always had. She tied her apron, logged into her register, and greeted each customer with steady calm. But even she couldn't ignore the change in energy. Customers had started talking about the story openly now. Some had heard it directly. Others only knew parts of it. A few would approach her register with a curious smile. "You're the one, right?" someone asked one afternoon. She never liked that question. "I just work here," she would answer gently. But people saw her differently now. Not in a dramatic way. Not like a celebrity. Just with a little more respect. One older man placed his groceries on the counter and said quietly, We need more people like you. She smiled, but she didn't let the praise grow too big inside her. She knew she had simply done what felt right in that moment. A week later, the official announcement came. The store would undergo a full upgrade over the next 3 months. New refrigeration units, fresh paint, improved lighting, a small seating corner near the bakery, updated checkout systems, employee training programs. The manager gathered everyone together again to share the confirmed news. Applause filled the store this time. Some employees looked relieved. Others looked hopeful. For many of them, this job wasn't just temporary work. It was how they paid rent, supported family, and built their future. After the meeting, her coworker nudged her gently. You know this started because of you. She shook her head. It started because someone forgot their wallet. They both laughed. But deep down, they both knew it was more than that. A few days later, the man returned again. Not in a suit. Not with an announcement. He walked in quietly, like any other customer. He didn't go straight to her register this time. Instead, he walked around the store, observing the early changes. New lighting had already been installed near the entrance. Fresh posters about upcoming improvements were displayed near the produce section. When he finally approached her counter, she was helping a young mother count coins to cover a small purchase. She waited patiently while the woman finished. When the customer left, he smiled at her. It's good to see you, he said. You too, she replied. He placed a few simple items on the counter. Bread, fruit, coffee. You're shopping light today, she said casually. He smiled. I learned my lesson. She scanned his items, and this time he paid without hesitation. As she handed him the receipt, he asked, Have you thought about what we discussed? She knew what he meant. He had offered to support her education or any training she wanted to pursue. At first, she had pushed the thought aside. Felt too big, too sudden. But over the past week, she had allowed herself to think about it quietly at night. She had always wanted to study business management. Not because she wanted to be rich, but because she wanted to understand how places like this worked, how decisions were made, how communities grew. I have, she said carefully, and I want to take evening classes, she answered. Slowly, one step at a time. His smile widened slightly. That's a strong plan. I don't want anything handed to me, she added quickly. I just want guidance. Guidance is powerful, he replied. More powerful than money sometimes. They agreed to meet properly later in the week to discuss practical details. Nothing flashy, just a clear plan. When he left the store that day, there was no silence. No dramatic pause. Just the usual sound of carts and scanners. But the impact of what had started weeks earlier was still unfolding. Renovations began section by section. Walls were repainted in warmer colors. New refrigerators replaced the old noisy ones. The bakery corner gained small tables where customers could sit with coffee. Even the employee break room received new chairs. Morale shifted. Employees smiled more. They helped each other more. It was as if the investment had reminded them that their work mattered. One evening, after her shift, she stayed behind for a small staff appreciation gathering organized by management. There were simple snacks and drinks. Nothing expensive, but it felt meaningful. The manager stood up to speak. We've always been a good store, he said. But now we have the chance to become something better. Not because of money alone, but because of who we are. He glanced in her direction briefly, but he didn't single her out. She appreciated that. Later that night, walking home under the streetlights, she thought about how quickly life could shift. One choice, one sentence. I believe you. She replayed that moment often, not because she wanted credit, but because it reminded her that character shows up in small spaces. The store reopened fully renovated 3 months later. The entrance looked brighter. The shelves were cleaner. The layout felt more welcoming. Customers noticed immediately. This feels like a whole new place, someone said on opening day. She stood at her register again, wearing the same simple apron, but with a new name tag reflecting her upcoming training program. She had begun her evening classes 2 weeks earlier. It was challenging balancing work and study, but she felt alive in a new way. The man attended the reopening quietly. He didn't give a speech. He didn't stand at the front. He walked through the store like a regular customer, watching families shop, employees laugh, and children sit in the new bakery corner with small pastries. At one point, their eyes met across the aisle. He gave a small nod. She nodded back. No words were needed. The story spread beyond the neighborhood eventually. A local newspaper picked it up, not as a dramatic headline but as a community feature. Talked about kindness, about investment, about how small businesses thrive when people care. She was asked for a quote. She kept it simple. "Everyone deserves dignity," she said. That sentence became the heart of the article. Months later, life settled into a new normal. She continued working while studying. The store thrived. Customers increased. Staff turnover decreased. The community felt stronger. Sometimes, when a customer forgot a small item at checkout or struggled with payment, she noticed something beautiful. Other customers would step forward and offer to help. Not because of wealth. Not because they expected something in return, but because they had heard the story. Kindness had become part of the store's culture. And it all began on a regular afternoon when a man in a suit realized he had left his wallet behind. In the end, the most powerful change wasn't the fresh paint or the new equipment. It was the reminder that dignity costs nothing to give, but it can return value in ways no one expects. She still worked at Register 3. She still greeted every customer the same way. But now, each beep of the scanner carried a quiet truth. Small acts matter. And sometimes, the simplest words can make an entire room go silent, and then slowly, beautifully, come alive again.